That's... Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please do subscribe. And if you're old here, hello again. New setup today. Hopefully I won't have the issue, if you know what I mean, with the lighting. Because that's been driving me absolutely mental. So it should be consistent lighting for this one. Can I get a hallelujah? And I also have a little special guest today who's gonna just sleep the whole way through it, but that's alright because she's really cute. And I'm probably going to end up being really distracted by her because she just melts my heart. But today I have an unsolved case for you. It is one of those cases where you start to think one thing happened and then it's like, oh, but that couldn't have happened because of this, and then that couldn't have happened because of that. And it's just like, I'm really interested to see what people have to say about it anyway. So leave a comment at any point if you're thinking, oh, what about this? This is the case of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon. They were from Amersfoort in the Netherlands and they were just normal young women. Lisanne was 22 and Kris was 21. Lisanne was described as thoughtful, intelligent, ambitious, athletic, and she had actually just graduated with a degree in applied sciences, which was amazing. And Kris, on the other hand, was extroverted, cheerful, quite creative actually, and she had just completed her studies in cultural social education. So like I said, they grew up in Amersfoort, which was just this cute little city in the Netherlands, and they had actually just moved in together a couple of months prior. So they were obviously quite close because they lived together, and they also worked together in a cafe restaurant. Now, obviously, the girls were dreamers and they wanted to go on a big trip to Panama in Central America. And there was a couple of reasons why they wanted to. First of all, I mean, exploring. Second of all, they wanted to learn Spanish. Third of all, as kind of a bit of a reward for completing their studies and everything. And finally, they wanted to help out a bit, so they wanted to volunteer with children. So all in all, it was just a very wholesome, pure trip, you know? And until this trip, Lisanne hadn't even gone any further than Germany, and that's like right beside the Netherlands. So she hadn't gone that far, and Panama, I mean, that's a big trip, you know? And they were gonna be gone for 6 weeks. Where are you going? Sandy's just readjusting herself. So the girls arrived in Panama on the 15th of March 2014, and for the first 2 weeks they were just kind of traveling around and they wanted to just see as much of Panama as they possibly could. On the 29th of March they arrived in Boquete, which is where they were going to live with a host family for 4 weeks, and that's where they were going to settle themselves while they were volunteering with children. And just for good measure, the woman of the household, if you will, her name was Miriam. I'll be using her name in a little bit, so just so you know that. But the girls basically had like separate access to their room. Like there was a main entrance to the house and then there was the entrance to their room, and they had like a different key just to get into their room, if that makes sense. But unfortunately, when they got to Boquete, they got some pretty disappointing news, and that was that the school that they were going to be volunteering at basically didn't have any work for them for the whole first week. And like when you're only going to be doing it for 4 weeks, a whole 25% of that was taken away, you know? So like that was really disappointing for them, especially because they had planned this trip so meticulously. So they obviously found this quite frustrating, and they had a load of free time now that they didn't really know what to do with. So they said, well, we might as well just explore a bit more. But anyway, one of the evenings, Miriam and Lisanne were just having a chat in the living room, and Miriam noticed that Lisanne had asthma and she was coughing a lot and she had like a really sore throat. She just wasn't feeling well. So she was shocked that the next morning on the 1st of April, Lisanne and Kris went for a hike. I guess they knew that their time was limited there, so maybe they just wanted to see more of Panama. So that morning they left the house, and before they went on the hike, they actually met up with these 2 Dutch guys, and they had been spending time with these guys quite a bit. Like they had gone for drinks, they'd gone to the beach, they had done quite a bit with them, so they got to know them pretty well. But I just think it's worth mentioning just because it's part of their last few hours of us knowing where they were and what they were doing. So a taxi driver dropped them off at the start of the trail at what he said was 1:40 p.m. But their digital camera and the pictures they took at that time said 11 a.m. So there's a bit of inconsistency there, but at the same time, like, either of those sources could be wrong. Hard to say, but I'm guessing it was somewhere in between those times. And it seemed they went on the Pianista Trail, which basically was this actually pretty well-known walk that would bring you to a summit that was about 8 kilometers from Boquete, and you would see so many mountains and clouded jungles and stuff like that. So apparently the views are absolutely amazing. And something that actually kind of surprised me was they actually brought the host family's dog with them. So this dog's name was Blue, or in Spanish I believe it was Azul was what they called them. Prior to starting the trail, they had posted on Facebook saying they were going to walk around Boquete and everything, but they also, just before they started the trail, had been warned by a lot of the locals saying, hey, don't go on that trail on your own, you need a guide, you need someone to go with you, it's not safe for you because you don't know the area and everything. And they kind of shrugged it off. They were like, be grand, like, no worry, don't you worry, we'll be fine. And the the really interesting thing though was that the following day, on April the 2nd, they had actually planned to meet a guide and go on a hike with him. And this guide's name was Feliciano, and I don't know, were they planning on going on the Pianista Trail, or were they going to do a totally different hike? But from what I've seen, it actually looks like they were gonna do the same one. Obviously, I don't know for sure, so that might be wrong, but that's kind of what I gathered. But either way, it just, I mean, if that is the case, it's very strange that they would go the day before on their own without a guide. Like, why would they do that when the following day they're gonna be going with a guide and it's safer and they'll see the best lookout points and everything? Like, you know, it just doesn't really make sense. But things get a little worrying when the evening of April the 1st, the dog came home and the girls weren't with him. First of all, smart dog. My dog wouldn't be able to do that. Like, would you be able to do that? Would you? And second of all, it definitely sparked concern because where are the girls, you know? But just like, imagine how worried you'd be if these two girls were staying with you and you know they're gone on a hike and then they don't arrive home and you know that they don't know the area, and it's like, that would be pretty worrying. But then at the same time, the family was like, you know what, we're not their legal guardians. There's a chance that maybe they let the dog go home when they were gonna go out to a bar or go out for food or just be out late somewhere. They were just like, maybe they made plans that we don't know about. So we can't really be like, you need to be home at this time. Do you know what I mean? So that night came and went, and the following day, there was still no sign of them. And like I said, they had planned to meet up with Feliciano and he was going to take them on the trail, and they never showed up. So as far as I know, he knew where they were staying, so he went and kind of checked out to see maybe they were there. And Miriam was like, nope, they're not here, but they went out hiking yesterday and they haven't come back. And they were like, okay, that's not good. So they contacted their families, and they also said that they hadn't been in contact with them since the previous day, like early the previous day. Basically, these girls have just gone into the wilderness and nobody knows where they are and nobody's heard from them. And I mean, I get the fact that in the jungle in Panama and in a mountainous area, the reception's not going to be great, so that could have a massive part in it. But at the same time, like, they never showed up, so where are they? So at 7:30 p.m, they reported the girls missing to the local authorities. And something about that fact really stood with me, because I was like, I'm not sure of the exact time they'd planned to go meet Feliciano, but I'm sure it would have been early enough in the day, because you're not going to start a hike at night. And so this was just unusual to me, because why did they wait till 7:30 p.m. to report them as missing? Like, did they just maybe wait a couple of hours to see if they showed up? But I just thought that was a bit like mental, because obviously when people go missing, the quicker you can get information to the authorities, the better. But anyway, on April the 3rd, the authorities started searching, and they just did some small searches, like small aerial searches, along with the indigenous people who searched on foot, but they found absolutely nothing. On April the 6th then, Lisanne and Kris's parents arrived in Panama, and with them came detectives, dog units, police, all from the Netherlands, to basically start a full-scale search and just really get into the nitty-gritty and try and find something. They searched the area thoroughly for 10 days, and again, they found nothing. The parents offered a $30,000 reward, but this didn't really spark any new information to come forward. Like, it was pretty much like these girls went on a hike and vanished into thin air and left no trace. So on the 14th of June, bear in mind, this is a whole 10 weeks later, an indigenous couple found Lisanne's blue backpack. Now, the strange thing about the backpack was it was found 17 kilometers away from where the girls were staying in Boquete and 8 kilometers away from where they had last been seen. So it wasn't really close to where they were when they started. Also, I will just say about where they were last seen, yes, it was 8 kilometers away from where the backpack was found, which doesn't sound like too much, but with all the hills and everything, that was 14 walking hours. So that's like a long way away. Oh, I've let it go cold. But this woman said that the bag hadn't been there the day before, which was a bit strange. That's a fact that sticks with me as well, because I don't know, it just doesn't make sense, especially when we start to piece together a timeline. So the backpack still had the girls' belongings in there. It had an empty water bottle, 2 bras, 2 pairs of sunglasses, $83 US, Lisanne's passport, both the girls' phones, and Lisanne's digital camera. And the one thing that was missing that should have been there was the girls' room key. All of this stuff was dry, even though at this time of the year in these volcanic mountainous areas, they would have a lot of rainfall, they would have a lot of humidity, and the backpack and all the contents were just totally dry. So that was already strange. And they were in good condition. Like the elements should have had some impact on something there, which, I don't know, that's another weird fact. There's something else unusual about this backpack. There were 34 fingerprints found on it and on some of the items in it. 2 of the fingerprints were from unknown women, which I don't know if that means they were definitely from Lisanne and Kris or definitely not from Lisanne and Kris. I couldn't even find that information. That's a pretty important detail. A DNA sample was also taken, and in this DNA sample there were somehow the genetic material of 2 unknown persons. So again, not sure if that means the girls or definitely not the girls, but there you go. But then another detail came out, and it was that one of these people was definitely a male, at least one of them. So what? And this was never investigated further, which I find shocking. What? Like, they didn't even look into who this could have been. One thing that was great though, they now had their phones. So there were a lot of ways to use these phones to find more information about where the girls were, what they were doing, etc. And lo and behold, they found so much helpful information on these phones. But before I start, I just think this is probably one of the most haunting parts of this case, because we get to see so much. You'll see. So several calls, scrap that, more than several calls were made to the emergency services in Panama over the course of several days. And only one of these calls actually went through. and it only lasted a little over a second. Obviously, this was because the service was so bad. The first call was made at 4:39 p.m. on the 1st of April, so that was only a few hours after they started the trail. This call was made from Kris's phone, and then only 12 minutes later, another call was made from Lisanne's phone. And these are all to the emergency services, by the way. Basically, between the 1st and the 6th of April, 7 attempts were made to call the emergency services, and somehow the authorities were also able to see how many times the girls had checked their phones for signal and stuff over the few days, and they had done that a lot of times as well. On the 5th of April, just before 6 a.m, Lisanne's phone ran out of battery. And then after the 6th of April, multiple attempts were made to access Kris's phone. However, they got the pin wrong loads of times. Like, it was clearly not Kris. The phone was never actually accessed again after that. So then between the 7th and the 10th of April, 77 more attempts were made to call the emergency services. 77. Which is so haunting, because clearly something was so very wrong and they couldn't access anyone or anything. But it did see on another source that those 77 attempts, it wasn't attempts to call the emergency services, but it was attempts to access the phone. So when they were getting the pin wrong and everything. Most of the sources I saw were that it was attempts to call the emergency services, but there's, again, it's an inconsistency. But obviously, back to the calls, we don't know for sure who was making these calls. Obviously, we're gonna assume it was the girls because it was their phones. With the incorrect pin in Kris's phone and stuff, it could have been a third party, but it also could have been Lisanne, and maybe at that point something had already happened to Kris and Lisanne just didn't know her pin. Or maybe Kris was fine and they were just confused and couldn't like remember or something. I mean, bear in mind now at this point, they had been gone for 7 to 10 days and they had very little water. I think they only had one 500ml bottle of water and little to no food. So I can't imagine you're going to be functioning that well at that point, you know? Anyway, I'm just throwing all the little theories out there, so hopefully it might spark an idea for one of you, and if it does, then pop it in the comments because I want to know. On the 11th of April, Kris's phone was turned on at 10:51 a.m. and then turned off for the last time at 11:56 a.m, just over an hour later. And yeah, there was no more information or activity on the phones. Now, another big piece of evidence in this case was the photos. The girls had taken a lot of photos during the day when they were hiking and during the night. And there's some weird stuff. Like, obviously, initially it was just pictures of them together on their own, just pictures of the views, just normal hiking pictures. But on the 8th of April, between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m, a total of 90 pictures were taken, on average about 2 minutes apart, and they were just of like nothing. Every single photo had the flash on, and by the way, these pictures were taken on the digital camera and not on their phones. But the contents of these pictures, there was just like twigs, food wrappers, rocks. There was one where it was like the back and side of Kris's head, and there was supposedly an injury to her temple. Circumstances surrounding these photos are just weird. But bear in mind, obviously they're in the middle of the jungle in the middle of the night, and maybe they were trying to scare off animals or something, but for 3 consecutive hours? I don't know. Some people also say maybe they were trying to light their way through the jungle or something, so that's an option. And I kind of thought, well, Kris's phone was an iPhone, and at this point it still had battery, so would they not just use the torch? But then I was like, yeah, but like, that's going to drain the battery pretty fast, like faster than they would want it to be drained. But other than that, there was kind of speculation around maybe they were trying to alert someone. But I just find this so... It was between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m. Yes, it would have been dark, but like, I just feel like it's a bit of a random time to be trying to alert someone. And this is a week after they left for the hike as well. So like, why on the 8th of April for 3 hours in probably the least likely hours that anyone's going to be looking for you? I just don't know. But obviously, like I said, at this point they were a week out in the jungle, and and maybe they were delusional, dehydrated, starving, didn't know what they were doing. But I just feel like to take 90 photos for 3 hours every 2 minutes, and they're all flash photos, like, it's just a very specific thing. I don't know. Please share your thoughts on that if you have any other ideas of what that could have been about. Like, there's always a chance that we're just not thinking about it in the right way. So then there was a big break in the case, and that was some stuff was found. A few kilometers away from where Lisanne's backpack had been found, Kris's shorts were found unzipped and folded neatly on a rock. Nothing really came of this initially, but 2 months later, Kris's pelvis and a boot with a foot in it were found. The foot was still in the sock and the sock was in the boot, but like, that's incredibly haunting. And there is a whole load of speculation about this boot with the foot, because like there were a lot of people saying that this was somehow normal, that like her foot would become separated from the rest of her body, but I was just like, and I tried to look into their reasoning behind it, but like, nobody could give a good reason from what I could see, and I just feel like that's absolutely insane. I don't know, maybe I'm just dim. Now, not long after this, 33 more bones were found scattered along the riverbank, and 28 of them belonged to Lisanne's left foot. And even though they were all like along the same riverbank, they weren't really that close to each other, which again is just so weird. And again, the circumstances surrounding the bones is so strange. And the reason I say that was all of Lisanne's bones that were found had skin still attached to them, whereas all of Kris's bones, well, first of all, they didn't have any skin, but second of all, it was like they had been bleached. And there were no scratches or marks on the bones or anything like that. So what is going on here? It was possible that someone did actually go out of their way to bleach them, but then like, why only Kris's bones and not Lisanne's bones? Or I did see some people speculating that maybe it was the sun that bleached the bones, but again, why all Kris's bones and not Lisanne's bones? Like, I was kind of thinking, you know what, maybe Kris's bones were just more exposed to the sun and everything, and they didn't have, because obviously it's a jungle, there's a lot of leaves and tree cover and stuff, but the fact that all the bones were so scattered all over the place, it just doesn't make any sense. There is a possibility maybe it was just coincidental and one of the girl's bones was more exposed to the sun than the other, but I just find that a little far-fetched. I don't know. Also, comparing this case to a previous case of an American tourist that went missing in the Panamanian jungle, her entire skeletal remains were found and none of her bones were bleached. And she had gone missing 2 years prior to when her bones were found. So, And then another thing, where were the rest of their bones? There was like 30 to 40 bones found at this stage, was it? And like, we all know that we have like hundreds of bones in our body, and they're 2 girls. Like, where were the rest of their bones? And, oh my god, I'm getting tired here. Like, and the bones were found almost a 24-hour walk away from where the girls had first started their hike. And how could they possibly get there on their own without any food and water? Maybe they thought they were going in the direction that would bring them back to Bouquet, and they were going in the total opposite direction, but like, there's a lot of just weird details about the locations of things in this case. So just a little bit about the trails to give you a better idea. These trails were pretty much made so that they were easy to follow. it would have been hard to get lost unless you kind of went off a little bit. If you did go off the main trail, it would be hard to find your way back. And obviously it's a jungle, so everything looks the same, especially if you're not used to that specific location. But there was also like a secret trail that was a lot more difficult and a lot easier to get lost in, and pretty much it was only ever used by the indigenous people in the area, and even they didn't like using it because it was really difficult to find your way. That pretty much brings us to the end of the facts. Let's get into some theories. So the first theory is foul play. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a possibility. Like, initially, the police actually thought that this was an abduction because of their disappearance. Maybe they were murdered and someone obviously didn't want anyone to find their bodies, so dismembered them and scattered them around the jungle, maybe. But obviously there's nothing really to say that this definitely happened or that this definitely didn't. Second of all, I mean, the animals. I mean, we're talking about the Panamanian jungle. I hadn't really seen much information or anything about the kind of wildlife in Panama and in this particular area. So when I looked it up, let me just read out the list I found, okay? Jaguars, jaguarundus, margays, green iguanas, 2- and 3-toed sloths, tapirs, kinkajous, mantled howler monkeys, squirrel monkeys, white-faced capuchins, ocelots, anteaters, pumas, 9-banded armadillos, deer, wild boars, Jeffroy's tamarind, white-nosed coati, grisons, bats, several species of poisonous snakes. I mean, I don't even know what half those things are. I don't even know how to pronounce half of those things. And I mean, poisonous snakes, I'm sure there were a lot of poisonous insects as well. So that would make a bit more sense than, like, say an attack from a big cat or something, because obviously there were no scratches or marks found on their bones. So that wouldn't make sense, but they could have very well have died from like a bite or a sting from a poisonous animal or insect. And then, I mean, the last theory is the elements. They had like 500 mils of water and they were in Panama in the jungle. Like, it would get so hot there. Not to mention it was very humid, not to mention they would have been at a higher altitude than they would have been used to. There was a lot of wind, rain. The rain would make it very muddy. They could have easily slipped, hit their head. There's an unlimited amount of things that could have happened just because of how difficult it would have been to survive there. Oh, and they had like no food. There's just no evidence for anything. Like, their cause of death was never confirmed, obviously. So little of them was found that it's like, how are we meant to derive the answers from a couple of bones of a foot or a pelvis? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. And then, unrelated to all those theories, I just wanted to ask the question, why didn't they follow the dog back? If they were really getting lost and the dog was going back home, how did they even know the dog? I don't know. Did they just think maybe they lost the dog? Like, if they had any inkling that the dog might know where they were and know how to get home, then surely they would have followed the dog. I don't know. I'm sure I've missed out on plenty of theories. Somehow there's so much information yet so little information. Like always, my heart goes out to their families. They still don't know what happened to Kris and Lisanne. It's really sad. I wish I had more to say about it, but it is really heartbreaking. Imagine finishing your degree in applied science, which I'm sure was not easy, and then planning this like once in a lifetime trip to Panama, and you're gonna volunteer with children and you're gonna explore the jungle and everything. How amazing. And they never got to experience it fully or return home.
I want to give you a hug, but I wish you all the best for the rest of your lives and stuff. I'm really going to miss you.
That brings me to the end of this case. I'll leave the sources in the description if you want to look into it a bit more. But yeah, other than that, thank you so much for watching. Sandy, come say bye. That's all from us. As always, leave your case suggestions in the form that's in the description. My Instagram is katephilpott_YT. Go follow me on there. Anyway, I'm kind of really losing my train of thought here. I need to eat, I think. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.